Sysdig is the first cloud-native visibility and security platform that eliminates the need for standalone tools like container security and monitoring. Using Sysdig's unique data approach, enterprises can solve a variety of visibility and security issues at massive enterprise scale for multi- and hybrid cloud environments. Sysdig will enable your organization to scan and block vulnerable images and enforce best practices pre-production, block threats, enforce compliance, and monitor application performance, proactively alert on incidents, reduce MTTR with forensics, and capture detailed audit records, all from a single unified platform. Accelerate your transition to containers and then have confidence in your ongoing operations using Sysdig. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/Sysdig.
Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. I'm your host, Mike Shima, joined by Matt Alderman and John Kinsella. Synopsys helps organizations build secure, high-quality software, minimizing risks while maximizing speed and productivity. Synopsys, a recognized leader in application security, provides static analysis, software composition analysis, and dynamic analysis solutions that enable teams to quickly find and fix vulnerabilities and defects in proprietary code, open source components, and application behavior. With a combination of industry-leading tools, services, and expertise, only Synopsys helps organizations optimize security and quality in DevSecOps and throughout the software development lifecycle. The new Security Weekly website is officially live. Visit securityweekly.com to check out all of our new sorting and filtering functionality. Please let us know if you find any issues or have any feedback by sending email to website@securityweekly.net. Paul, our very own Paul, will be providing his insights and predictions in the information and cybersecurity space at a local ISC Squared Rhode Island chapter meeting on Monday, November 18th at Greg's Restaurant in Providence. If you would like to join us, go to securityweekly.com/ISC2RI. So that looks like always fun. I always like the local meetups out here in the Bay Area because it's a great chance to just chat with people, figure out what they're working on, as well as just to realize that the information security community tackles some big topics, but it tends to be rather small. So that's always pretty fun.
Yeah, maybe I'll get some a free dinner out of it too.
There you go. Oh. Well, it's not. I guess I don't have a good segue for free dinner, and this was not free vulns because they were very well paid for. But the latest of the biannual Pwn2Own hacking contest just announced their results last week, and it was pretty interesting because a lot of the targets this time were hardware devices, things like the Amazon Echo, bunch of Wi-Fi routers, as well as I believe there were some phones that were in there as well. But to me, one of the things that was, I think, most interesting is that if you're running JavaScript within your IoT device or within your other device, you're going to fall. Because pretty much, I didn't do the full count, but there was a Java integer overflow, another Java integer overflow, a Java use after free, another JavaScript, use after free, another JavaScript out of bounds check that led to an RCE. So it's pretty much kind of a bit of an indictment, perhaps not on the language. We can set aside language wars, but an indictment on how difficult it is to create a compiler for JavaScript that can handle all of the robust capabilities and essentially creativity that people can put into writing JavaScript, as well as actually being, not becoming brittle, being resilient against flaws.
So first of all, are we surprised that these devices fell? No. I mean, we've seen these, and we'll see more of these, right? I mean, it's the nature of IoT. It's going to continue to happen. But I think you bring up a very good point, Mike, in that one of the primary attacks happens to be JavaScript. So the question is somebody out there thinking about a better way to drive an interface on these devices that makes it more secure, right? I mean, we've seen the application of technology to these IoT devices, and sometimes just failing miserably. Maybe JavaScript is one of these scenarios, right? Where maybe what we have to think about is a different way to approach the user interface aspects of setting these devices up and eliminating JavaScript maybe out of these devices and coming up with something a little more secure. Just a thought.
Just a thought.
It reminds me a little bit of Ada, right? Ada was never intended to be used. Was it Ada or Pascal? Not both. No, maybe Pascal. It was never intended to be used for anything other than a language to teach people how to program. And it took us quite a while to get rid of it. And JavaScript, unfortunately, someone thought it was a good idea in the beginning to use in a browser. But man, I'm going to be happy when the day this thing goes away. Personally, I know we're not getting into language wars, but I might have opinions on that.
I agree. Just a few. Me too. But what's interesting is that because there's a couple things I can imagine here. One is that you have kind of to John's point, if everybody knows JavaScript, or there's in the space in this, by the end of the show there will be at least 2 new JavaScript frameworks, I'm sure, developed. But if everybody knows it, you might as well deploy or write, support a language that everybody knows. There are other languages out there that can be perhaps more embedded friendly, but maybe they just haven't gotten picked up enough. One that comes to mind actually is Lua. And I first encountered Lua because that's what Blizzard used for to be able to skin and write the UI for WoW, for their World of Warcraft. You could customize with a lot of Lua. And just imagine they were very interested in countering cheating. They were very interested in making sure something was secure. And sure, they could have gone a JavaScript route, but with Lua, they were able to actually have a much more constrained language, and also have, say, we're not going to use the components that allow networking or the components that allow these other types of file handling or data handling. It's going to be basically the idea of least privilege applied to a programming language, and that kind of is what we're lacking a little bit with JavaScript, as well as just lacking the ability to have a hardened JIT environment so that we can have a language that's still easy to write and performant when we execute it. But I think and I'll just leave that when we execute it ambiguous as we roll into the next topic. So one of the other things that I pulled out this week was an interesting bug. This was a glitch in a Robinhood. So Robinhood is basically doing stock transactions, stock trading. And there was a logic flaw here that basically allowed a user to increase the amount of leverage that they would have for margin trading. So to be hopefully still somewhat accurate and put it into non-trading terms, basically they're saying that the app said, put up some money and you can ask for some additional money on loan. And we'll just base this on how much money is in your account. What the flaw was is that when you would put up some money, ask for a loan, get that in there, then when you ask, you could basically continue to do this. And the value of your money that you're putting up was also including all the prior loans, essentially, that the app had been giving you to be able to increase how you're going to trade on margin. And so essentially, this one user was explaining how they went, turned essentially $2,000 into $100,000 to be trading with, based on being able to continuously exercise this particular logic flaw. And I thought that was pretty interesting because it's not something that normally you would call out in many of the injection type of flaws from the OWASP top 10. It may not be something that might come immediately to mind in your unit testing that we were just talking about in the segment before. But ideally it would if you had sort of a threat modeling exercise thinking about with your developers about how could this be abused, or what happens if a bad actor, or let's just call it a greedy or even just a smart or clever actor, went through this particular workflow.
Yeah, back to 2 points. One, you should have gone from free dinner to free money. That would have been the segue. Just saying.
So much better. Let's start over.
But we were just talking about testing, right? In testing functionality of your code. This is a perfect example of a missed unit test in functionality, because this could have been tested for in the application as part of the testing process in the pipeline. One that was missed and allowed people to gain a lot of extra money they probably shouldn't have had access to.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. FINRA is going to be, someone over there is going to be having a few hard conversations with FINRA, right? Because it sounds like, at least from those two stories which are mentioned in there in the article, it doesn't sound like this was just happening over a few days. It sounds like this was going on for a while. There's supposed to be someone signing off on trade and trade audits. So I guess maybe Robinhood isn't going out to public markets, but still there's something in there where, this should have been caught a lot sooner, I suspect. And then the second thought around there is, oh man, I lost it. Oh, well, keep going. I had a handoff for you. But.
Well, then, yeah, great point, Matt. I think the other thing here, too, this is one of those few bugs that also has a very concrete value, financial loss associated with it. We were talking about pwn to own, and I did actually purposefully kind of gloss over the value of what all these bugs were, because I think that kind of dilutes the importance and the message around, one, JavaScript being creaky, and that if you have a dedicated team of 2 or 3 people with 3 to 6 months of time to research against a particular device, they're going to find some flaws, and they're going to be compensated for that time in either like a pwn to own or in a privately, or by exploiting the app in this case, or, and I'll use this for the segue while John is still trying to remember what that other additional thought was. Our other article was just kind of it's more just a point of interest about Bugcrowd saying they'd paid out, 500,000 in a week. And that was a big payout for them.
Yeah, my segue was going to be that, we talked about testing and unit testing the previous half hour. Really, these guys were allowing, testing in public and production with, they were doing basically bug bounty without paying people. So... yeah, it's we were talking about bug bounty a few episodes back, and still very interested in talking to folks out there who this is how they make their money. But it's they had some interesting stats in there, not just the 500K in a week, but 1.6 mil I think it was over the month. And then I think I want to say around 600 vulnerabilities for the month, if I remember right. So I don't know. I hope they do that. They publish that monthly, because that'd be a fun stat to watch the report come out from that. That could be like their equivalent of their Verizon DBIR. But I think that could be really interesting to watch over time, see how it changes or grows.
Yeah. So I'm curious about this one. If you're Bugcrowd, is this a good thing or a bad thing from a business model perspective? Because think about this. I mean, that's a pretty big payout in 1 month, 1.6 million, 513,000 in 1 week, which is what you're trying to incentivize, right? You're trying to incentivize this crowdsourcing of identifying bugs. But is this a good or bad thing from a business model perspective? Because, if that trend continues, it could run you out of money.
Well, they're just spending their customer money, right? So, because really their customers is just companies that want people to test in an organized manner. So, it'd be interesting.
So it's all good.
I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember if there. I mean, there is one downside, but I can't remember if they commission per payment or if it's per month. Which way they do it. Oh man, my brain's really shot today. So fine, keep going. I'll forget. I'll remember my thought again when we get to the next one.
Yeah, I think to that point, this is Bugcrowd's taking essentially a cut of this as the bounties are coming out of the companies where they're being found. But that still, I think it still is a really important question. Like, is this a good thing, or what does this really mean? I wanted to highlight this article because we had talked about it a few weeks ago, so I thought it was was still on my mind. And really, I guess one of the things it's pointing to is that for paying a lot of money, that's fine, but go and do the math about $1.6 million paid to 550 people, and then break that down onto what's that dollar per vuln. And once you start paying around, I think it's around $900, or for a call it a common vuln, or their top rated vulns can be $3,000 on average. You could also potentially just pay for a pen test and get a lot of value in terms of coverage or finding vulnerabilities. So there's definitely these trade-offs here. And Bugcrowd, to their credit, are also and the other platforms are also trying to address this idea of coverage and making sure that people are actually doing continuous looking around for bugs and getting rewarded for that when they find the bugs, but also figuring out if the three of us sat down and were poking around a website and didn't find anything for a week, that's time that we spent that we're not compensated for. So all interesting things. But I think another interesting thing for me, and here's how I'm going to sneak back, eventually bringing fuzzers back into this segment as well. Chrome talked about their GWP Ace, which basically is a address sanitizer in the vein of LLVM's sanitizer that I've talked about several months ago. And this one is specifically for going after heap problems. So this will be things like use after free, out of bounds, and basically page writes that are page corruption. And several of these are the types of problems that we actually have seen in that pwn to own contest within JavaScript. So what Chromium did here, and they have a really nice, somewhat technical write-up, is just describing a new approach that they have deployed into Chrome. But importantly, they can deploy this into production. So when I was talking about fuzzing and doing that, or turning on address sanitizers and UBSAN and a bunch of other these LLVM compiler sanitizers, these either have they extend the compile time by quite a bit, or they're introducing instrumentation within the code that creates a overhead. So it could be a 2 to 3 times overhead, which maybe doesn't sound necessarily bad, but if we go back and roll the tape from I think even last episode and find out how many tabs that Matt keeps open in his Chrome browser and how much it slows down his laptop, trying to do that a 2 to 3 time overhead or slowdown is just going to make him pick it up and throw it out the window. I'm going to bet. Don't want to speak for you, Matt. But the idea here is that this reduces very minimal overhead by essentially sampling some of the heap allocations that are being done. So hooking into the normal malloc-free process, the allocators that the software is using, and then just over a period of time, just checking, hey, look like anything wrong here? Nope, nothing wrong here, nothing wrong here. And then when one of its guard pages or one of the areas of memory where it's tagged as nothing should have happened here, if that does get touched, then it immediately triggers a crash, which also helps developers say, here is where this crash was found. Now time to go debug and debug it. And then before I take my next breath, want to also say why I'm kind of excited about this is that not only will it find these memory corruption issues within Chromium or within the code they're using, it can also find and identify crashes that would be caused within third-party libraries they're pulling in, or even because of Mac OS that you can hook the allocator. It could even find crashes due to heap, misallocations or heap overflows within code that's running in support of Chrome, but that isn't, with a system library itself. So all really interesting for all those reasons. At least I think so. I think John and Matt might have been put to sleep by that. We'll see.
No, I think this is it's it takes a little more effort to crunch through an article like this. And I'll admit sometimes when I look at these with my management hat on, I see like halfway down there's graphs. I'm like, ooh, pretty. But at the end of the day, yeah, this is stuff that they're not just publishing this stuff for the hell of it. There's actually value in the rest of us reading it and seeing how do large projects like this learn and improve, and they're doing it in a transparent manner, which I think is really great.
Yeah, and I think there's two things that are actually they're helpful to the broader ecosystem too. One is that this will, as I mentioned, it's designed to find bugs in Chrome, but it's also going to find bugs in the system libraries and third-party libraries. So it's going to have that ancillary benefit to the ecosystem that's just running around the Chrome browser. So that'll be just a good uplift for everyone. So there's a great benefit there. And the other thing too is they're not running this on like a fuzzing farm that they've spun up in GCP with a few thousand instances of Chrome. This is actually, you could also think of this as the pretty large distributed memory sanitization effort that's running on, I'm going to guess, a few million, if not tens of million Chrome instances. So it's another way, just that by having that scale and seeing this be rolled out is probably going to be even more successful than their own fuzzing environment, just because of they can potentially run into so many different scenarios. So to pull back from the deep technical details, those two reasons, that scale and being able to find problems even outside of but around Chrome, I think are going to be great benefits for the security industry as a whole.
Which makes Chrome, still one of the favorite browsers. Love them or hate them. I mean, it has it's just so efficient for me. Like I said, every tab is its own little process, and so I just buy a quad-core i7 with more memory and call it a day.
Call it a day. Well, we haven't finished our day quite yet, and we did get to join you, Matt. John and I joined you on a Business Security Weekly episode. And that kind of made me think of this article that I called out too, what CIOs want from CISOs. And the subhead right there kind of speaks to a theme of DevOps, DevSecOps, which is collaboration and not finger pointing. So I just thought this was another article that was talking about that relationship, and we've shifted up a bit higher to that C-level, to the executive suite, about how this relationship can work and what does it mean between who is basically assuming the risk and who's accruing the risk for a particular organization and who has the influence to be able to address it.
Yeah, there were some interesting stats out of here that I want to read because I think they're really telling. In the UK, so this part of this was done, the survey results in the UK, 65% of companies in the UK have a CISO or equivalent who reports to the CIO function, which means they're not peers. Only 12% say that the CISO is a peer to the CIO. So think about that for a second, right? In the US, we've seen more of a CISO-CIO peer relationship, and therefore, as peers, they need to learn to collaborate and work together. In the UK, the CISO reports to the CIO, and the question is, how collaborative can you be when it's a boss structure, which is kind of what this is trying to point out a little bit in this article, and that there still has to be collaboration, even though they're not considered peers per se, and work together to solve the problem. And this is the crux of the DevSecOps movement, is how does security and the development teams, rolling up to a CIO, work together to achieve an outcome of speed and agility with security in the mix, right? And that means these guys have to be talking, have to be working and collaborating together to make this stuff work, which is the fundamental challenge I think we have in the DevSecOps movement right now, is that collaboration not happening.
No, I agree. And I think pushing through on two more articles to get through is, I think this could also be tied into my next article is about AWS Application Patterns. And this I could still think, there's a strategic aspect here of, if we still have our thinking from the CIO and the CSO. And this article calls out not so much specific design patterns for developers, but it helped more, in my sense, as a way to map all these different AWS offerings into particular areas, conceptual areas, whether this, in this case, is calling around operations or security or reliability or performance. And it's just showing up, here is where to think of chaos engineering, which is general, but here is where ACLs and AWS IAM works in. Here is where AWS Trusted Advisor, they're talking about basically ways that AWS has built to introspect its own environment. And this article talks about AWS, obviously, that's just why I was listing off, but we've also seen Azure has built a lot of similar capabilities as well to be able to introspect their own environment and be able to make these, understand what tools should you be using for the right job.
Yeah. This ties in, I did add a couple articles, and this one ties into kind of this discussion between hybrid cloud and multi-cloud and what are they? Because this comes into play a little bit. Hybrid cloud, I think a lot of people get the two mixed up, right? And so if we think about a hybrid cloud, what's hybrid cloud? Well, that means I have some on-prem components and I have some cloud components. In the case of, if you're a single cloud like an AWS, how do these tools and capabilities in that cloud provider help augment what you're doing on-prem? In a multi-cloud, things get a little more interesting because now you're using two cloud providers like an AWS and an Azure, and each one has its own set of capabilities. Now what do? How do you bring those two together? How do you manage those centrally, because they're being provided by two different providers? Somebody has to bridge that gap, right? Which gets really, really interesting. So this article does a deeper dive into some of the nuances and differences between hybrid cloud and multi-cloud, because things like these patterns are going to vary based on who your cloud provider is.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. Yeah, I forgot to refresh, and yeah, so I see that article now, and I guess I don't have any good insights that I could throw in or anything to add that you didn't already cover. So one other thing that I called out was there was an article about taking advantage of the change freezes for this year. And this is also topical because just last week we were talking about, well, if we have a change freeze, that means at what point do we get to talk about security? So we can't do it right now, so maybe we have to wait to January. But if January and your retail app is waiting for a big Valentine's Day push, you don't want to do anything in January, so maybe you have to wait till March, but then you're starting to get into something else and so on. So this article is just a nice way of saying, sure, there will be a change freeze. Maybe, pick whatever the time it is, or since you're not picking what the time it is more pick what to think about while you have that freeze, because there's a lot more than just writing code to consider about the application that you could be doing, about the processes you could be building, things like that. So I just threw this out there as some food for thought to help close the loop on that conversation.
Well, it talks about, if you have a test environment, you can do some proof of concept testing on adding capabilities. We were talking about testing earlier, right? Mm-hmm. Change freeze might be the time where you build out some of those security tests and figure out how to integrate them into your pipeline, so that is when you unfreeze, now you can start to have those new integrated security tests in your pipeline because you didn't impact the current production environment. Just a thought.
Just a very good thought. Yeah. And I think we do have one other article that got thrown in here were 5 super helpful Git commands.
Yeah, I threw this in here for you too.
Yeah, I'm curious. Yeah. So
anybody use these?
Not sure. I found them super helpful.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I
appreciate the thought and the both of yours, Matt, as well as the author behind it. I think my big takeaway, it really depends on what are you using Git for, right? Whoops. If you're actually coding with Git or actually maybe running, it's your turn to do the merges and get stuff ready for testing and unit testing, as we were talking about before. You need to probably have a whole separate blog article about merging, because that's where I think things get interesting around Git. The Git force, yeah, that sort of set off my heckles as well, but yeah, I like the idea. I mean, it'd be interesting. I think where I'd like to go with this article is, back in the day, I was a pretty strong opponent of DigitalOcean because they did a great job marketing. But what they did was just SEO juice like crazy. They got all their users to write blog posts on how to do X, how to do Y, and then they were just mining the SEO juice out of it like crazy. And like as a result, they're always showing up in top results on Google. But the problem is that what you would get would be someone who had been running Linux for about 2 weeks telling you how to secure a Linux box, and it would just drive me nuts. And I think some of the sites on Medium are doing something like that now. And again, they're running a publication. I get it. Security Weekly business. We're all, here to not just, we want to encourage people, but also I just want people to do a little bit cleaner, safer way. And there's a few larger of these sort of aggregation sites on Medium that I think they're allowing people to have a voice, which is great. But at the same time, hopefully there'll be a little bit of feedback on this article and suggesting to author maybe better things to prioritize next time with Git.
You mean you guys aren't a big fan of the git reset command?
Oh, I actually use that one a lot.
Yeah, I use that all the time because if there's one thing that's universal, it's messing up your merge and destroying your tree and having to do a hard reset. So yeah, that's at least one of the ones that I've memorized.
I think some of them are really, they're definitely something you use. But I think the question in an article like this, right, is how do you really show value to people who are going to be reading it? And like, luckily there are 5 bullets, we can go through it pretty quickly. But hey, maybe not talk about git amends, but talk about when you're doing a commit, you don't have to go into your editor. You can pass your commit comment on the command line. So that might help save people time. So I think it's not so much just like what are the 5 most commonly used or super awesome git commands, but how can you use git better?
Yeah, I think that would be a great topic for a future ASW, because I think what you're really getting at there too is that this 5 bullet points are sort of divorced from a strategy of what is, why would you need these, or what's the context for them? What is your merging strategy? How do you go about cherry picking? Does everyone work off of main branch, or are you working off of feature branches? What's your branching strategy? As well as just talking about amend, how much do you care about the visual cleanliness of your Git history versus that it should be immutable and going forward? And if there's a mistake, mistakes happen, and sure, it's going to be recorded for all time, but you don't want to be necessarily adjusting, changing hashes like that. And I think that would be, and I think all of those would be a great conversation to have. And we might even have to get, we'll get Paul to talk Matt into doing some of the coding too, so that Matt can learn some of these Git commands and feel some of the pain as well.
My
Good
favorite
luck with that one.
My favorite one of the last few months is using Git to merge 2 separate repos. Like if you've started work on code in one project and you want to go, hey, that could be useful over here. How do you bring that in and keep your Git history? But to circle back to the article, I wasn't actually going to bring it up because I don't want to make it sound like I'm just sitting here ripping on the author. I'm quite happy that someone out there is posting stuff like this. The last thing I want to do is try and mute someone or censor someone. I'm just saying, hey, how can you learn and improve and be more of a helper for other people? So hopefully good things come.
Yeah, I think that's a great message. We want to encourage not just regurgitate what the Git help command does, but here's some of why, or here's a scenario where you've messed up your branch, and here's how you can go and fix something, or here's how to pull yourself out of a quite confusing state that you've put your repo into, and all those can definitely be helpful. So yeah, it'd be great to see more of the same, and just more insight into using those for sure. And with that note, we hope our listeners, thank you for listening, and we hope you gained a little bit of insight, if not an integer overflow amount of JavaScript insight for this week. And we'll look and want to say thank you to Matt, thank you to John, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week on Application Security Weekly.